Hollywood.
Let's try live again.
Yeah, maybe
Going live in 3, 2, 1. We're going to test out the sound again on this second attempt at a live hangout. My name's Patrick Coffin. Going to vamp a little bit while more folks join us, and we'll test the sound of our guests. David Gordon and Timothy Gordon. 66% of Rules for Retrogrades are joining us. How's the sound, Nipsey? Nipsey is my non-existent tech friend, based on the real Nipsey Russell. It's an inside joke.
I need them to talk.
Yeah. So, gentlemen, welcome. First, you, Dave. Welcome to you, sir.
Thank you, Patrick. Good to be here. I hope my sound's coming through loud and clear. I've also been accused of having dumb voice before, so that's just me if it sounds like that.
Dumb voice. Tell me more, said Ron Burgundy.
Right. Just that bane that plagues young men where they sound less intelligent and therefore are typecast into funny roles. On account of
they sound less intelligent than they assume they are.
Maybe the Napoleon Dynamite complex.
A bit. Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Tim.
I was 13 years old.
Okay, that makes sense.
Since you were 0 years old. I'll vouch for that. What's up,
So,
Pat?
Tim, you're also a retrograde. You have some rules as well. Welcome. Good to see you again.
Thanks. Yeah, I have some rules I live by. They're the rules for retrograde. It's good to see you again. I guess I'll reciprocate. And
Yeah.
good to see everyone in Coffin Nation, in my imagination, I suppose. What's up, everybody?
It's real. It's the eternal platonic form of what I do. I don't even know what that means. I was going to accuse Dave of looking more Mexican than you do, which led me to doubt whether you were uterine brothers. And on second thought, when I look at your physiognomy, there is a similarity there. So I'm over it.
Okay, good. That would have been alarming to realize we're not brothers just by the ravings of a madman on
We
our
are
computers.
We're the same percent Mexican, Patrick, if it makes you feel any better. Should I try?
I married into the Latino world, so in your case, Latino, kind of. What is it, like 8% Mexicano? Something like that?
16%?
No, 8.
Es verdad?
8.
Verdad?
It's 8%. Okay.
Creo que sí. Sons of the Cristero Nation, no doubt.
Yeah. And also, we're a bigger percentage Italian, as many have probably speculated. And then Scottish as well. The Italian part isn't the Gordon.
Isn't it? Wouldn't that be Gordoni? Gordoni. Timoteo Davide Gordoni. Quando parla mucho mi amore di velici corazon. See, it's pig Italian. I don't even know what's real Italian.
It's pretty good.
It sounded really legitimate, I'm not going to lie.
Oh, thanks. Yeah,
it's in my college semester of Italian, so I like to think I'd be able to understand somebody speaking full rate Italian.
If actors listening right now will know what doing in Italian means. It means a run-through of the script from beginning to end super fast over and over again, so people learn the rhythm of the story and like all the blocking moves, because the Italians tend to, at least from the outsider perspective, speak very quickly. But English speakers tend to speak quickly too. I've heard that from people trying to learn English.
Not me, though. I have dumb voice.
Oh, dumb voice. What? Wait, what? The Keanu Reevesification of our young men.
Right. Except without the persona to go along with it. Like, do you surf? Nope, just dumb voice.
No,
Yeah.
I'm just...
Yeah, just low IQ, even when I wear glasses. Well, a lot of people are excited to have you guys on because you're really chewing up the interwebs with Rules for Retrogrades. And we've talked a little bit off the air about the inspiration for the show and the platform and the book. So Rules for Retrogrades sounds suspiciously like Rules for Radicals of the Church of Saul Alinsky. How many rules are there in your mind and in reality of the book?
Well, luckily, there's an identity shared between our mind and the book because it's been written, which is what happens when you get a book finished. There are 40, as opposed to Saul Alinsky's 13 rules for radicals. So there are 40 rules for retrogrades. It's a fuller read. It's a better read, and it's a truer read. I think people are going to be excited about this book when it comes out in early 2020.
And if it does well, there could be more rules in my mind, that depending on... I'm just kidding.
And on the page.
I was going to say maybe more rules from your mind can be instantiated in an upcoming edition in the real world, outside your extra mentally, so to speak.
I mean, to give the compliment back. You complimented me working in the word phenotype to our earlier discussion. I
Yes.
compliment the scholastic philosophy term being worked into this bro chat at the beginning here.
I'm just trying to rack the shotgun and push all the non-Thomas, people who are not book nerds, out of the room, frankly, because they're not welcome here. No, that sounds mean. It's like the word retrograde is one of those concepts that obviously you're using it kind of ironically. Maybe we'll start with this before we segue into things that we're grateful for in a time of crisis, and that is there's a wonderful. Oh my gosh, I use the word wonderful. It's the most overused word, especially by bishops. Have you noticed how many times the average bishop uses the word wonderful? Just something I noticed.
Privately, use the word fabulous a lot.
Ooh. Yeah, and maybe lingering a little too long on the N in wonderful. Anyway, irrespective of that, Chesterton has this quote, and I'm going to maybe butcher it literally, and that is, don't tear down a fence until you know why it was erected. We live in an age where everything's forward-moving, everything's forward-looking, everything is, it's life at the speed of Twitter. We used to use the metaphor of microwave. Well, that's too slow now. If it's new, it's got to be better. It sounds like Rules for Retrograde is a look back at the institutions and the principles and the ways of being that have bulletproof track records that need to be revisited. Am I going in the right direction?
For the book or for the show, Patrick?
For the book, and I'm thinking that the show is a echo of the book, or a one of those German-made sidecars on a motorbike.
I would characterize it as this: the book is a way of reclaiming a very Catholic culture, or perhaps bringing about a very Catholic culture in the United States that has been at least truncated, if it was instantiated at all before. At this point, well, that's what I would say about the book. So 40 ways to recapture or Catholicize the culture of the West. As far as the show, I think it's things that the retrograde, somebody who wants to bring in a Catholicized culture, would about, and the viewpoints according to them, according to people in this camp. So it's like what the retrograde say about this, whereas the book is the means by which the retrograde brings back this culture.
Yeah, and the unity is that the Roman Catholic Church built all of Western civilization, root and branch, and in west of the Atlantic Ocean here in the United States of America, we have this tortured relationship because it was started as a Puritan country, but its roots really were still Catholic intellectually, as I wrote about in Catholic Republic.
Yep.
And so when you rebuild anything that's good on the so-called right wing, when you do it the right way, you're restoring Western civilization. And when you do that the right way, it's just living the culture of the social reign of Christ the King, the Roman Catholic Church's culture, Christendom. Right. It's all the same.
I got two dings. I'm not sure what that was. Super loud dings. Maybe a notification somewhere. Yeah, I was going to ask you about the thesis of Catholic Republic, a topic on which you and I have spoken on and off the air, Tim. In fact, I remember the first time I encountered your ideas was in Catholic Answers magazine. I was in the kitchen at the previous employer of mine that shall remain nameless, although it was Catholic Answers. And I read it cover to cover and really enjoyed well, it's a new, but it's also an old look at the DNA of this country, and the fact that there was only one Catholic signer, and that the thinking on the part of the fathers borrowed. Let's be charitable and say borrowed heavily from the thought of people like Thomas Aquinas and Saint Augustine, and so on. Let me push back a little bit. You used the phrase Roman Catholic. As I remember, the term Roman as an adjective was stemmed from Henry VIII's desire to be the head of the church in England, and that Roman Catholic was used as a kind of a devil term to distinguish from the Church of England, which wanted to have legitimacy. A little eyebrow goes up when an adjective appears before the word Catholic. Do you see what I'm getting at? Is that a valid question to pose?
Sure. You mean why do you need any kind of? once one is troubled to stipulate Catholicism, why do you need any sort of modifier?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's sort of. I mean, it's more just habit on my end. Man, we really need to disconnect that. We just got a new Apple computer and iMac, and we need to disconnect it from my phone. Sorry about that, people. It's super annoying. Even I'm the perpetrator.
We're Christians. We forgive you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you all. We're Roman Catholics, and I mean, any real addenda to the modifier Catholic is unneeded. So and that's kind of what we're doing on Rules for Retrogrades, is we are all about just saying, look, neoconservative Catholics that love JP2, that tend to refer to him as John Paul the Great or whatever, so-called trads, I'm not even in trouble about the so-called left Catholics at National Catholic Reporter and Massimo Fagioli, Max Beans, as you call him. They're not even in the club, but on the faithful corners of Roman Catholicism, really, you don't need any kind of modifier. It's just Catholic, and that's good enough. That's good enough. Yeah.
So Catholic, full stop.
Yeah.
One of the things I like to point out, and this is certainly going into the territory of things to be grateful for, because there's some amazing things happening around us, hopefully through the Holy Spirit within us, that we need to acknowledge. Because believe me, I have the bitching and moaning gene. I'm sort of peevish by nature. I like pointing out the flaw in the masterpiece. But I live a very short distance from the Jewel of the Missions in San Juan Capistrano. And St. Junipero Serra said Mass in the very chapel where I've been to Mass many times. It's the same structure. That's the same altar. And the bells that announced the beginning of Holy Mass were ringing out here on the West Coast before the documents were signed in Philadelphia and so on. So there was already a magnificent beachhead of Catholic culture in California, as I know you know. But I just like thinking about it. You see the dates on these the plaques at the Mission San Juan Capistrano, which is a really terrific day visit if you're ever out here in Southern California. And then you look at it kind of come out from the center of that the eyeball, the pupil, the irises around that pupil are towns like, well, let's start with San Juan Capistrano, who is a saint, San Clemente, Santa Barbara, Santa Monica, people. They have collective amnesia about where these names come from. Who would guess that San Francisco is actually named for Saint Francis of Assisi, and the capital city of California is named for the Eucharist, Sacramento. I think the fact that the ACLU types haven't put that in their crosshairs is another thing to be grateful for, because if you were to found a town, let's say, some remote area of Alaska, a newly discovered island just off the coast somewhere, and you decided to name the town, I don't know, New Sacramento, I'll bet you there'd be pushback if you went too explicitly Catholic in your nomenclature. Am I being paranoid, or do you think that would be an issue at this point?
I could see that being an issue legally, definitely, because I think one of the things is that these cities that were named, and even like from the time, I'm not exactly sure of the timeline here, but from the ratification of the First Amendment, then they would almost be godfathered in, or grandfathered in, not godfathered in.
Yeah, that too, if they're Italian. Yeah.
Right. But if you were to try to name a new city after, like, Eucharist or something, like Eucharist, Alaska, or
Eucharisto.
Right. Yeah. Or like Our Lady, the town of Our Lady, Alaska. I could see it being legally an issue, and obviously this is not something I'm researched up on. It's a fairly nuanced question, but because it's not grandfathered in the way it's not like part of the fabric of tradition in this country, which is something that courts look at. If you're talking about substantive due process, one of the tests that courts use for this thing called substantive due process under the 5th and 14th Amendments will be to say, okay, has this custom existed in the legal consciousness of our nation since the time of its founding? And if so, there's this kind of tension when you say substance and due process, because substance and process are obviously things that are like mutually exclusive in their definition. But there's this kind of oxymoronical nomenclature of substantive due process, where the courts do recognize that if something has been this deeply entrenched in our nation's history, then it has to be constitutional. It's like a right that's guaranteed to you under like the penumbra of the Bill of Rights of the Constitution. And where I'm going with this long, boring tangent, is that, perhaps a town like Sacramento, the courts would be open to keeping that around under, the Bill of Rights of the First Amendment, notwithstanding, versus a newly named town, they might be ready to jettison that because that hasn't worked itself into the fabric of our culture.
I have the same old delusions of adequacy.
So, for people who wondered maybe what
I'm in the day after.
This is
Thanksgiving turkey,
the glowing
carb coma emanation from it's the sort of the spirit of the thing, the gist of the thing, right? But it's not there explicitly, like the right to privacy that the justices in Roe v. Wade found in Griswold versus Connecticut, right?
Precisely. Yeah, that's what it's like a shadow, but not. It's the shade of
like Sacramento.
Yeah, the idea is as much as that, because that hasn't worked, hate it. Most of them hate it. Okay. America founded on the Cardinal Bellarmine more than it is on John Locke or Algernon Sidney or any of and our cultural, the best of our culture, not just some deep unknown secrets or arcane aspects of our culture, but the best parts. Natural rights, subsidiarity, virtue ethics, church-state relations, the family economy, everything about America is utterly Catholic, and it's there. It's not only there in the DNA; it's there in the philology. If you check into it, that is my.
What do you mean? It's there in the philology?
The people that the founders were reading. Look, our founders, who are calling themselves the neo-Whigs, were reading Locke and Sidney, sure, but this kind of ties into Thanksgiving. We should give thanks that those Whigs were responding to one man, the enemy in England, Robert Filmer, who wrote Patriarcha, who had made up this concept of the divine right of kings.
Divine right of kings, right.
Yeah, and everyone thinks this is an old concept. It's not. The really extreme form of it goes back to the Tories and the Tories' hagiographer, Robert Filmer. Robert Filmer wrote Patriarcha in response to Cardinal Bellarmine, who is posing the rights of man, natural law, all this stuff, the goodness of republics. And Bellarmine was a very good Thomist. And so the Whigs knew that the enemy of their enemy, who was Cardinal Bellarmine, even though he was this hated Catholic, he was right, and the Whig project was based on Bellarmine. And the Neo were too.
Tim, how much do you think this divine right of kings? Oh, I'm looking pretty blue here. I'm going to go back off myself.
Yeah.
Let's try again here. In the meantime, I'm not blue, people. It's just
the Papa Smurf look is in. I've heard though, Patrick.
It's the Stephen Bishop song, Bluer Than Blue, Sadder Than Sad. You're the only light this empty room has ever had. Oh, okay, we're fixed. How much has this divine right of kings error seeped into the perception of the papacy as a kind of divine right of kings, doctrinally speaking? I think that misunderstanding has been imported in some way.
Yeah, it has. Well, this is one of the great ironies. I wanted to talk to you about this on today's Rules for Retrogrades. Yep. As much as all of the pushback in Roman Catholicism comes from basically one overlapped corner of Catholicism. That corner tends to be people who call themselves trads, traditionalists. Most of the traditionalists in the world today are Americans. And most of these people are incidentally, accidentally monarchists. They don't get the irony. The irony seems to be wholly spent on them. That what we're going through with the abusive stepfather, Papa Francis, right? And, I guess some people hold out the hope that a real father is still Benedict. That is the trouble, the natural inbuilt risk of monarchy. Now, I'm not suggesting that the papacy shouldn't be seen as a monarchy, but what I am suggesting is there are three good regimes open to the Thomist and the Aristotelian, and republics and a mixture of, actually a fourth regime would be the republic that is represented by Old England or America. These are a really nice model because they offer us an out to the kinds of perverted forms of monarchy that you see with the Francis pontificate, or the perverted form of monarchy you see with George III, tyrant, the pretender kings of the 17th century, and the Tory King George III, who we declared war on in the latter part of the 18th century. Mm-hmm. So the point is, the idea of monarchy is getting fetishized by a lot of traditionalists now, and it makes some sense in view of the sort of degradation, erosion of our republic. It doesn't make any sense in view of the degradation of the monarchy, the throne, the apostolic throne, which is currently being defiled by Pope Francis.
Well, let me also jump in and speak to something. I think perhaps this is what Patrick had in mind with his question. The divine right of kings being applied to the Pope, almost to give each papacy a rubber stamp, I think is a dangerous idea. Because although the conclaves that elect popes should in theory be guided by the Holy Spirit and be open to his workings, and indeed the permissive will of God is always going to be at play, maybe not his active will. But so if people think, well, the Holy Spirit is essentially coming down in a sort of new Pentecost.
Yeah, I was going to say mini quasi-Pentecost.
Exactly, yeah, coming down at every conclave, that is not consonant with the idea of human sin and the idea of the rejection of God. So now if we have these cabals or blocks of cardinals who are actively working to subvert the church or to change the church, we have free will as human actors. And you see this in the Constitution on Divine Revelation. God never interferes with our human will, even when he's giving us divine revelation, right? So even at these conclaves, human free will is preserved. So these cardinals, it's not as if they're protected from making error. That we have had the Borgias and just a whole, a bunch, an unhappy number of bad popes before. So it's not like there is this divine rubber stamp mandate on each pontificate because somehow, in theory, conclaves are supposed to be led by the Holy Spirit, because I think in practice there are oftentimes bad actors with political motives who are closed off to the workings of the Holy Spirit, and who in turn push in somebody they know is going to toe a progressive party line, as opposed to one best fit to lead and sit in the chair of Peter going forward.
No, I agree with that. And I think that a lot of Catholics have a quasi-magical view of what a conclave is, as though the Shekinah glory cloud of the uncreated God descends into the Sistine Chapel, and voila, that's the Holy Spirit's man. Church has never understood papal elections that way. I think bad popes are something to be grateful for. And the reason is, there's a story from the Decameron, a Boccaccio story, middle-age short story about a Jewish businessman in Paris named Abraham. You may have heard the story. Abraham decides he wants to be baptized, and he knocks on the door of the archbishop. And he says, look, I want to be baptized. And the archbishop's thrilled. Abraham, come on in. Whoa, hold on a second. I want to go to Rome first. So this is the Medici Pope era, and the archbishop knows if Abraham goes to Rome, he's dust. He's going to see concubinage and cardinals being murdered, and just a real salacious Corinthian / Castro district meets, Amsterdam. So he doesn't want him to be scandalized. He tries to press him to be baptized that day, and he goes, no, look, I got to go and see for myself. So he goes, and 2 weeks later, door opens, and there's Abraham smiling broadly, and he says, Abraham, welcome back. Did you go to Rome? Yeah. And he said, what I saw there was disgusting. I was scandalized, and I was very disheartened. I'd like to be baptized, though. And he says, why do you want to be baptized after all that, Abraham? And he says, I told you, I'm a practical Jewish businessman. What I saw was so corrupt that it would have folded 2 weeks after the resurrection. It's been here 1,500 years. It's got to have God behind it. So I want in. So that's the lens through which I see bad popes. It's divine protection. Despite Judas, he was possessed by Satan, John's gospel tells us, despite the cowardice of all the apostles, despite my sins and imperfections. This is the church that God has chosen, not because of the virtues of the member. Like Israel of old, Israel was not the most powerful. It was not centered in Athens or Jerusalem. Not Athens, it wasn't Rome. The very foundation of the faith came from a hick town named, Bethlehem and Nazareth. So to me, just segueing to things to be grateful for, a lot of Catholics are in crisis, gentlemen. They are tempted. They're listening to, another way to put it, change the metaphor, they're smelling the incense of orthodoxy. They're looking admirably at the boldness of evangelicals. And my word to them is, don't leave Peter and Jesus because of Judas. Tell me how you guys are, like when family or friends ask you about the crisis and why stay Catholic. How do you answer?
Well, the temptation to orthodoxy, Eastern Orthodoxy, the 14 autocephalous churches, is particularly spurious because, remember, the first half of this troubled, toilsome, bespoiled Francis papacy was marked by an emulation of Greek Orthodoxy in terms of the moral life, the moral theology. That's what the 2014 and 2015 synods on the family were an emulation openly of the Orthodox teaching on, communion for divorce and civilly remarried. Mm-hmm. So it's like you don't get out of the fire into the frying pan, or out of the frying pan into the fire, when you take a great Catholic hijra and you flee Roman Catholicism and you jump to Orthodoxy. They've capitulated to culture long ago on all of the moral theology issues that we do. Taylor and I on TV back in the day, we did a great show on why to stay Catholic. I'd like to just reaffirm what you said, Pat, about there being a very distinct, peculiar reason that all of the infiltrating wicked arms of the one diabolical force, have always been centered on infiltrating the church, first from without, now from within. Mm-hmm. It's because it's the one true faith. It's great testimony to the verity of the one true faith.
That's true.
False faiths don't get. I mean, look, Protestantism is a religion that was made up about 500 years ago, or a series of 39,000 religions. It bespoils itself, and it becomes secular humanism simpliciter. It does it on its own. It's an aping of Christianity without the sacraments, without priests, without bishops, and without a church. So no one's going to focus on that. It's the one true faith that is being, for whatever reason, as strong as Orthodoxy is, it's not being infiltrated. It was never infiltrated, even in the 4th, 5th, 6th centuries of Rome. It was always Rome that was being infiltrated by foreign invaders and foreign, outside polytheistic ideas, which gave us things like Arianism.
Could you say that Orthodoxy, capital O, wasn't necessarily infiltrated, but it willingly co-opted with communism, at least in its Russian iteration? A lot of political kind of interference there. I'm going to throw to you, Dave, and we'll find out what you're grateful for. Cardinal John O'Connor of New York remarked once, and I think it was the context of sharing the stage or the dais with the late great Father Benedict Groeschel, whom I knew and admired very much. And he was talking about the fact that back then it was ACT UP, these what are now called LGBTQ2 activists, enraged at the Eucharist one day in St. Pat's Cathedral. I don't know if you remember that. It's probably the late 80s, maybe early 90s. And they were throwing condoms, and they were taking the Holy Eucharist and spitting on it. And Cardinal O'Connor made the point, well, they're not doing this to the Methodists or the Baptists. Why is it? For those Christian sects that think we're the Whore of Babylon, why are these satanic forces unleashing all their rage in one place?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I've heard before that even, like, I guess in their final christening, or I shouldn't call it a christening for fear of falling into accidental sacrilege, but in their final blessing or what have you, that satanic priests have to actually pick out a consecrated Eucharistic host from like an assortment of non-consecrated hosts. And what I'm going with that is everyone recognizes, you know, you can know by reasoning a priori, and you can kind of intuit from reasoning a posteriori. And everyone intuits in their gut, in their heart, and then in their mind, that the true church is the Catholic Church. Even when you think about Hollywood, you know, in the movies, they always portray, if somebody's Christian, it's almost invariable that there's some kind of Catholic, because we have the rights. It just has a stamp of legitimacy on it that, you know, it would be so unsexy and so unglamorous to stage people in the movies like at a Protestant church where they're doing like 45 minutes of rock and roll, like banging on the drum set to like, my God is an awesome God, and then have, you know, another 45-minute sermon followed by like a shot of the Concord grape juice and a Triscuit cracker. That just doesn't, you know, there's a ring of emptiness, of almost like banality to that, that just shows that it's not real, and people get this intuitively. They don't need to be trained on it. And same with people. Yeah, people know the basics of history. They know that you know there was only one church until well, Orthodoxy sprang onto the scene in the 11th century, and then Protestantism sprang up in the 16th century. But they know the basics, where it's like, well, I saw for the first 1,000 years, this is the one church, and now there's some kind of spin-offs, but we know who the real guys are. I think that's it.
It's totally, that's right. I was thinking about the movie The Exorcist. Can you imagine The Exorcist? Instead of the priest and Father Marin, it's Benny Hinn doing a, you know, deliverance ministry.
Jimmy Swaggart,
Jimmy Swaggart, right?
Exorcism.
Fantastic. Then, So, what are your top one or two things, David Gordon, you're most grateful for, despite things that are happening?
Always, number one, just the fact that God exists and has redeemed the world through His Son, so that no matter how bad things get on this side of the eschaton, that I have hope. There's always hope, no matter how bad things look in regular quotidian life. There's always something to look forward to, and that's heaven, if you're living the good Catholic life and the sacramental life. So that nothing, no news, no life developments, no developments in the Vatican can ever separate us from the love of God. Like St. Paul says, right? No neither powers, nor principalities, nor angels, nor archangels, nothing can ever separate us from the love of God. Notice what he doesn't say, though, is ourselves. You know, we can turn our backs on God. We can
that's
do
the scary part.
Right. So that's number one. Just the love of God and the redemption of the world. And that's not just a token thing that, you know, people have to say or throw out there, or they ought to be accused of like heresy or not being faithful. It really is. If you're living the good Christian life, I feel like that always has to be number one, is that gift of hope. Number two is my family, who support me unwaveringly, steadfastly, and who love me with all of their hearts, and that I can always count on the love of my wife and children and even extended family, you know, brother. These things, it's very reassuring that there's nothing that can happen in this life that I'm going to find myself walking alone. And I think there's a continuity between number one and number two, in that, you know, I'll never be without God, and I'll never be walking without God's grace. And I'll never be walking without the love of my family. and that's reassuring.
Tim.
Yeah, I like Dave's answer a great deal. Also, the signs that Jesus performed and instantiated in the seven sacraments is. I'm not just being corny when I include this in a catalog of things that
I'll never be without,
especially in view of what we were talking about, the kind of
God's grace, and on
colonialization of culture by Protestantism and the outstripping and demystification of the sacraments. It's a really pathetic. I mean, with all due respect to our Protestant brethren, it's a really sad way of life. When everything has to be internalized. Any bit of corny when I include this in a catalog of things
I'll never be without,
especially in view of there's a kind of real banality that attends that way of life. Because of the sacraments, which are both, mysterion in the Greek and sacramentum in the Latin, they're both kind of visible and invisible components to each of the seven sacraments.
Right.
They talk about the beauty of matrimony, Eucharist, especially confession, which is beautiful. There's an outward moment, there's an inward moment. It's very human, and I'm just so grateful that this is the true way. It's so concomitant with our human spirit, which is both formal and material. It's Aristotelian. There's the high and the low, and it makes sense that the Lord would put things together this way, because we're human. We need comfort foods, things as superficial as that, and yet we need deep spiritual, Christological nourishment, and both of those come through the Eucharist. So my second answer, in addition to Dave's too, would be the real beauty that comes from our faith, not the fact that we're not body haters, the way that the Protestants almost become Donatists or dualists. There's real dangers of that when you don't live within church, when you don't have an ecclesial reality that's based on the sacraments and a real apostolic lineage. We're not just sitting up here trying to give Catholic answers to the question. We're literally. It's beautiful that we're allowed to have a beer, unlike the teetotalers we grew up near in the South, when we were in Texas. So many of our Protestant friends' parents were teetotaler. You can have a drink.
Granted, our neighbor used to drive us to basketball practice while drinking a beer and chewing tobacco.
Road soda. That was our other neighbor. Yeah, that was concerned with that. Not a teetotaler. But I mean, you can celebrate Halloween, Christmas, have a good time, watch a boxing match, all these things that, Pat, you call them the pearl clutchers. They're the Catholics that are out there emulating Puritans.
Isn't that the rich irony? The Puritan spirit. It's in a way it's a hangover from, broadly speaking, the Reformation and the Manichaeism, the dualism, where the spirit, soul is good, body is sort of very suspicious, if you will, instead of this full-blooded incarnational view of the world, which befits us because we're body soul composites. Yeah, that's an irony. So many, my gosh, people from all over the world. Let me just quickly turn to a couple of questions for y'all. Ex Scientia Fides, you inspire us all. Thank you. Ex Scientia Fides. I wonder if that's his real name.
Oh, is it the initial X?
Yeah, there's someone who needs to be banned, a super ultra to the right of the angry trads. We'll move on with that. Let's see. Here's an example. Paul VI is most probably in hell. Okay, great.
Switch the camera to your face.
Should we respond to that or?
Nah, no, it's the low-hanging fruit. Let me get here. When you're talking YouTube or Twitter / Periscope, you're talking about the flotsam and jetsam of the world. Let me turn to Facebook. They're all humans. Oh, Yvette Weilacher. All good. Thanks, Yvette. Yeah.
Say Facebook in parentheses.
Yeah, I know, but there's too much junk. I know. Deacon Patrick Labbert accused my Italian of being from the Abbey Road Pig Latin. All right, let's see here. The Gordon brothers are ghosts haunting Patrick from the grave. Bwahaha. Thank you, Matt Mercier. Let me get to. I want to read this first. Okay. Oh, Carl Strelo. Carl's one of my beloved Nationistas in Adelaide, Australia. I can see Patrick Coffin is another who's going to make poor me buy more books. Talking about your books, by the way. Someone is asking about the rules for retrograde. Can you give us a couple of examples of the rules of the 40 list?
Yeah, you want to give one of yours, I'll give one of mine.
Yeah, sounds good. Go first.
I was trying to buy some time. Yeah, one of mine is never trust a man that's unwilling to have enemies. Never befriend a man that's unwilling to have enemies. He can never be a retrograde because in this life, principle has a cost. You gotta pay the band if you want to hear the tune. Yeah. And the cost is you have enemies. We do it every episode, Pat. Every episode of the Patrick Coffin Show. Every episode I did with TNT, and it's like, man, I'm out there saying things that have a cost, and I'm not noticed. People that listen to you, people that listen to us, people that listen to Taylor Marshall, they notice we're not hedging our bets. We're not speaking with that weaponized ambiguity that seems to be the parlance of the world, and definitely the parlance of the Vatican at this point. I'm saying here's my here's my answer. Our Lord said, let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. Sometimes we plan on current events indeliberately, and you can walk it back a little bit afterwards. But that doesn't happen too often. And be willing to speak boldly. That's what a man does. Be willing to, don't leave your actions in the lurch. Pay the cost. You'll have some friends that'll come to your aid, and but you're going to have some enemies that come to your front. So be willing to do that.
I think Michael Voris's catchphrase, "The Church of Nice," really nails it, because it's rooted in a. And I'll say this: I guess it's rooted in an effeminate, not true feminine, in an effeminate fear of conflict. Yeah. Mike Pacolic, a great professor of philosophy and business ethics at Catholic University of America, was on my show last year, and he got my attention because he wrote an essay in I think it was First Things, tying the botched sex scandal treatment on the part of the bishops and the new reboot of dead wrong content with respect to the death penalty, which is planned for the new catechism. And the connection, he says, is this: mothers are the ones who kiss the skinned knee, and they're the shoulder to cry on, and they're the soft love bomb for a kid, right? The dad is the lawgiver and the law enforcer. He's the one commissioned to expel the evildoer. And what is the death penalty but the ultimate expulsion of the evildoer? Some men commit crimes so heinous they deserve to die, and not merely to keep them from the community and keep them from committing other crimes. That's another topic for another day. But I thought that was interesting. The mortal dread of hurting someone's feelings, whether they're taken from the priesthood or laicization. Like when I hear the priestly class, and with all due respect to the Holy Priesthood, I love priests and are grateful that Christ set up a hierarchical church. But when I hear talk of, laicization, it's the death penalty. No, it's not. Compared to the crimes of child abuse.
Right.
So there's a hyperbolic approach to things that's kind of borders on hysteria. Tim, let me ask you, the rule that you just laid down about not being afraid to have enemies, that sounds like a good diagnostic question to think about or to ask a woman to ask a man who's courting her. Are you willing to gain enemies? Because if we're in this Catholic life known as marriage together, we're not gonna be in the the CNN cocktail party circuit. We're not going to. How would that rule apply to someone pondering marriage with someone they're in a courtship with? Do you see that parallel?
Certainly. I'd say 4 or 5 of the 40 rules, I don't know if it was one of the ones Dave was going to mention, but they involve courtship and a new biosolution, outbreeding the radicals, because they really don't breed except intellectually in the, academy. That's the only way they're breeding at any kind of threatening rate. But yeah, I mean, women absolutely should be sizing up the men that are courting them, and men should be sizing up women they're courting. And this is one of the questions that both men and women ought to be mutually interrogating one another with, especially women with the men, though, because, you know, naturally women they're not sort of battle ready the way that men are intellectually and bodily. It's natural for a woman to fear having enemies. But a young girl, 18, 19, 20, should be like, dude, are you willing to make some enemies, to piss some people off, to step on some toes, to ruffle some feathers? What if people, are looking at you askance and stroking their beards judgmentally? Are you going to be the type that cares? Assuming that you're acting in the name of principle. Don't marry a young man if he's afraid of having an enemy. Don't call a young man your friend if he's afraid of having an enemy. These people are to be, they're the ones to be ousted, the ones that are afraid of having them. It's the militant moderates, which is another term that will come out of this book we hope to popularize. They're the ones that are unworthy of friendship or fellow feeling. And yeah, it's an important issue.
Dave, what about you? What are some of your rules for the upcoming Rules for Retrogrades book?
Sure. I think the one I'd like to mention now is that conventional wisdom should be a hateful thing for all retrogrades, because the conventional wisdom of yesteryear is what landed us in the tough spot that we're in today. So all boomerisms are to be rejected. You know, common sense is very uncommon. And you hear all of the silliness that's come out of a bygone era that lost the culture of the Christian West in a short 30, 40-year periods, right? Maybe even a 20-year period. So why these people feel confident giving us their snake-tongued and foolish advice and with an air of moral superiority and priggishness it's mind-blowing. And what's even more mind-blowing is why young men and women are listening to some of the bad advice of yesteryear and are giving their assent to it when they see, based on the results, it's been nothing but a sheer disaster for our culture. Yeah. So these things, and we've talked about them on air before, but how about the St. Francisism, or the phrase falsely attributed to St. Francis, preach the gospel, use words when necessary, that essentially every church lady over the age of 40 that I've ever spoken to just rolls right off her tongue, right, when she's telling you defy Christ and not carry out the Great Commission in evangelizing the world. How do you convince people of the truth of the real presence, or of the truth of the doctrine of the Holy Trinity, or the sevenness of the sacraments, just by being super, super nice to them? If that were the case, if that was effective, if that was the main way to convert the world, we'd all be Mormons, right? Because they're super duper nice. And if you are ever needing to move, they are your guys. But that's not the way, because you have to explain concepts with words, since we're an intellectual, man is an intellectual being. It's what differentiates us from the animals. So that's folly. Or how about get married late after you've explored yourself and found out who you are and have gone on 2 vacations backpacking through Europe. It's like, look, backpacking through Europe doesn't actually make you smarter. Like eating French food that's, mass-produced for dumb American tourists or whatever, that doesn't actually make you smarter. It's just an excuse for college students to go hook up with people who speak a different language. It's stupid to be rejected. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, well, and just piggybacking on that very point, some really smart-sounding people, indeed some smart people, can be dead wrong on really important things.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so these things that you've heard that are just like basically unquestioned bits of wisdom. Catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. No. Do you know how many people? I've taught RCIA at 2 different parishes, one being an 8,000 family parish, and I was the head of the whole thing. And I had so many people come up to me and say, look, I am glad that you're here and you're not just blowing smoke up our rear ends, and that you're willing to say it, what the truth is, straightforwardly and with candor. Because I've been, involved in the church in this capacity for years, or I've been feeling out the church in another capacity for years, and all I've heard is basically Dana Carvey, like church lady types, with the saccharine positivity in an age of a culture where that's just morally destitute, morally bankrupt.
They're called Susan from the Parish Councils.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah,
They
right.
talk about, they don't even give like sacramentology right. They can't even get that right. But
Yeah.
it's like
Therapeutic, what's the phrase? Therapeutic moral deism.
therapeutic deism was that coined in that book God is Not Nice? And I forget who wrote that. Was it a Marquette?
I think it was, I want to say Christopher Lasch, and I don't remember the title, Lasch. I could be wrong. Someone in the comments, some gimlet-eared person will definitely correct me on that. I thought it was Christopher Lasch. Culture of...
Look it up. There's 20.
Philip Reif, maybe, R-E-I-F-F. Anyway, to your point, David. Yeah. So people, when they hear the unvarnished truth, something comes alive in them. Finally, there's no agenda, there's no filter. There's no one's trying to placate me or domesticate the message because they think I'll leave if I don't.
Right.
Our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ said hard things to people who could walk away. You look at John 6, the walk away power of the announcement that unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life, not a little bit of life, not much less life, no life.
Right.
And he let him walk.
He didn't go after him, right? He didn't say, like, try and dumb down his teaching. Oh, I was just speaking figuratively, or you're going to understand it after the resurrection or after Pentecost. He lets him go, and some, cast pearls before swine. So if people are going to go, you have to accept that not all are wanting to be saved or are going to be saved, and they have to be able to walk. When you dumb down the truth of the gospel so that you can preach a gospel that's universally palatable, which it's not hard to be a Christian, then all you're doing is keeping the people in the church that would want to walk anyway and who aren't going to faithfully live the gospel, so they're nominally in the church, and you're doing it at the expense of the true disciples who would actually change their lives to fit the gospel message if they heard it in its non-truncated, unbowdlerized form.
Yeah. Speaking of bowdlerized, one of my pet peeves is not only the I'm just going to keep me off the blue here. Don't know what's going on. I'm not sad, really. The feminized bowdlerization of already sappy songs from the Glory and Praise oeuvre, the selection that are delivered to ordinary form masses in suburbs all over the world. There's a song by Sister Suzanne Tulin. I know you know it. It's called I Am the Resurrection. I am the resurrection. I am the life. You know that one? Now it's changed to, instead of he who believes in me will never die, they who believe in me. And I will raise them up. And I will it's like this. Really? Let me.
Hey, I did an equation. That's the only possible way that song could have gotten any gayer than it already was.
In our rules for retrogrades, too, feminism and basically has to be rejected in all of its forms. And one of the main ways that feminism has really lodged itself into the public consciousness is through words. It's through our lexicon, and it's through basically jettisoning these old rules of the English language. So people listening, I've read, like, I TA'd for a moral theology class. So I've read people's papers and, college students' papers, even at faithful schools. And the gender neutral language, like he or she or s/he or using they when you're
using
talking
they, right. Yep.
Person of unknown sex in the singular. No, that's all wrong. You use he. It's in The Careful Writer, which is a book that was published by the editor of the New York Times, I think 1968. The Careful Writer, all the old style manuals tell you, person of unknown sex, the default pronoun in the English language is he. So we touch upon this a little bit in Rules for Retrogrades. Stop letting people tell you how to speak. If you see she as a pronoun attributed to a person of unknown sex, or you're just reading some intellectually compromised filth. True speakers of the English language hold their ground on principles. And that's one. No gender neutral language. He is the default pronoun.
Yeah, this is something that a lot of people have never heard before, a case in behalf of the English language being perfectly inclusive. Because they pull this Freudian nonsense that, well, it's a tell. You're subliminally, philosophically excluding women. And what turned me around on this was an essay by Father Paul Mankowski way back in the, I want to say 1989 Crisis Magazine, the print version of it. It's called, I think it's called Grapes of Wrath, something like that. And he launches his essay, this is an important topic, with the white boot scam. Apparently in the late 60s, there was this movement, kind of like the ice bucket challenge, where everyone got on board, and it was kind of like woke culture 60s style. And what people would do, thanks to radicals like the Black Panthers, would encourage especially guilty white liberals to take white shoe polish and paint their black or brown shoes white with this fake white polish. And the rationale was, you're symbolically treading on the black man by wearing dark leather shoes. So paint them white in solidarity with the their downtroddenness and the fact that whitey is crushing them. Now you can't disprove that you're not a racist or that you are a racist. In fact, as soon as you say the words "I'm not a racist," you've kind of lost the argument, right? So transfer this to the English language. The presupposition is sold to people so often from so many different quarters, including, schools and authors that you would otherwise think of as reliable, sell this feminist premise about English. And one of my mentors, Dr. Donald DeMarco, if you look up Donald DeMarco English language, you'll probably find the essay. I can't, off the top of my head, forget where it first appears. He says, well, the feminist dream, linguistically speaking, would be a country like Turkey or Egypt, where they don't have the generic man for the races. And so how many feminists or progressive women would like to live in either of those two countries, which, linguistically speaking, should be their Shangri-La?
Can I volunteer then? Yeah, I would like for many feminists to be forced to go to Egypt or Turkey, and I think that would work out very well from my perspective.
They cure feminism over there, from what I hear.
And ironically, the feminists, as you well know, Pat, will not take on Islam. Can I just say that this is one of the rules for retrogrades, but the only proper response to being accused of being racist, sexist, ageist, whatever, any of the other is two words. Who cares? You're entitled to your opinion. If what I just said, which almost never involves race or sex or whatever, if it makes you think I'm a racist or a sexist, who cares? I'm not a boomer, man. Yeah. That don't play here. This generation's tired of it, man.
Dude, our generation.
No one's like the boomers thought that was such a big deal. It's funny hearing a boomer talking to one of these, not that I identify with, even these Groyper people. No one cares. We're beyond it, bro. I mean, the Groypers are way more beyond it than me even, but that is a relic of a bygone era, and no one cares being called racist anymore. Talk to the hand, girlfriend.
Dude,
you've strolled into the wrong saloon.
Yeah, no one cares.
We grew up in an integrated age, Right. I grew up playing with just kids of all different colors without thinking about it. Don't thrust like the 60s segregation baggage on this generation. That's why they're so obsessed with it. You have this generation of older people who grew up in an era where white people apparently were so racist that they were racist against other types of white people, right? They'd be like, the Italian guy, like, oh, look at this Mick SOB over here. And then the Irishman would be like, oh, shut up, you dirty guinea, or whatever.
Yeah, right.
That we're just like, it's some extra pigment. Who cares? If you accuse me of being racist, you're a really stupid person, and whatever. I think my two words would be whatever, bro. Or sex than two words.
Not cis, bro.
Adding just ist to the end of every kind of modifier doesn't do it for me. Is the other thing. Like, you're sexist. Like, I guess maybe, because I believe women have their distinct place in the world, and it's not what Western society currently envisions them as the place that they hold. So, like, I don't even care about the accusation. or just taking the word phobic and adding it to the end of a word. You're transphobic. Like, yeah, you're damn right I'm transphobic. Like, I'm phobic of all sorts of sins.
Dude, a tranny made my coffee at Starbucks the other day, and I had to throw it out, so I guess maybe
Good heavens.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, at some level, it's just like, man, I thought you wanted me to do me, and I got my best friend happens to be a woman, like Michael Scott says, and I got friends of every color, so I'm not too worried about it. But I'm not going to spend more than 2 words on defending myself.
Yeah, makes sense. I think there's a whole generation of people under the age of, say, 30 who don't know who Bella Abzug or Susan Brown Miller or Kate Millett or Germaine Greer. These are second wave feminists that these young people, they just don't care. It might as well be from the 1860s as the 1960s. Let me turn now to the traditional form of worship that's got centuries of track record of producing saints like, I don't know, all the post-Reformation saints, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, John Paul II, and that is the traditional Latin Mass and the overlap between young, vibrant, intellectually curious families who they find that because they didn't go through those cultural convulsions, they're basically younger than millennials even, and they bring a natural, unbiased curiosity to things like this exotic bird called the Latin Mass. And homeschooling, I find there's a lot of overlap between homeschooling families and young families that enjoy the extraordinary form Latin Mass. And one of the things you said, David, I wanted to just pick up and toss to Tim, is that people who are professional teachers are invested in not really supporting homeschoolers. You find this among a lot of bishops. They're not crazy about it. They, like the colored lady that you can stay on the bus, but you can't really sit up front. And that is, if you're in a school setting, you've got your crew. Maybe it's a small school, so it's not a lot of kids. You're stuck with these people for 12 years if you go junior kindergarten up to 12th grade. Whereas in the homeschooling environment, there are hockey games, football games, pickup soccer games, hoops, and it's multiple ages, multiple races. All the concern about PC stuff and obsessing over race, non-issues. They have to relate to people out of their age sphere. Does that make sense? That's just it's a benefit of that whole mindset that is off the grid of PC obsessions.
Yeah, it's like the socialization of genuine diversity. I hate even using that word, but there's more extemporaneous realness, as they say on the street, to homeschooling. The tie into the Latin Mass. Sorry, I just wanted to make this point. You kind of said 30 seconds, 45 seconds ago that there's this connection between homeschoolers and the Latin Mass. There is. The connection between the Tridentine Latin Mass and serious-minded Catholics everywhere is that they like it. It feels like you have a religion, where I went to St. Vitus there in San Fernando 3 weeks ago, and it's like a Latin Mass in town that got removed, so I haven't been the last 6 or 8 months. It feels like going to church. It feels like you believe the sacrament is sacred. It feels like you believe that God and Jesus Christ, his divine Son, are sovereign. So that's the fascination with it. Our Pope Francis the Humble, he can't figure out, he says dig, dig, whenever he sees young people that are so into the Latin Mass, he can't figure it out. Well, here you are, Papa. Yeah. It's that people are naturally drawn to religion. It's both a natural and a supernatural virtue, and that is reflected in the Tridentine Latin Mass. It's boring. Again, this is a boomer thing. Boomers thought to keep young people interested. I don't really believe they thought this ever. I think they're just trying to ruin everything. But they claimed, if you want to keep young people interested, you got to speak their jive, bro, and you talk their young language. It's like, no, young people like the Latin Mass because it's the real language, the timeless language of the church.
Isn't that an irony? I'm sorry, Tim. Were you landing the plane or making an additional point?
In the river.
Okay, very good. Pachamama style.
Yeah.
Yeah. Father Daniel Witz, his biological father is Dr. Paul Witz, and they wrote an essay together in Homiletic and Pastoral Review. I'm not going to do it on the fly because there's too much juggling going on here, but it's on narcissism as the root cause of liturgical abuse. That in the traditional Latin Mass, the priest does not have his back to you. The priest is the pilot, and it's good to have the pilot looking forward, to ad orientem, to where Jesus is coming again, to Jerusalem, aiming east. And if the priest is facing the congregation, then so much of it depends on his precious personality and his witty asides, and everyone's sort of gawping at him as he pronounces the words of institution. It literally doesn't matter which priest it is in a Latin Mass, and not that it's unimportant, but that's not the focus anymore. It's really worshiping the Father in spirit and truth.
Also note this, Pat, just one quick point. The single point of stringency that these live priests, Father Feelgood, want to obtain, want to perdure into the future, is the idea that you need to be there for the gospel, not because they care whether you're there for the gospel. If you're there for the gospel and Mass, these are people that say literally, you can go ahead and contracept if you're married. That, divorced and remarried really ought to be able to receive the Eucharist. You could violate major life rules, status rules, and not go to hell for it. These people will say, if you're not there for the gospel, you haven't fulfilled your Sunday obligation, and that could be a mortal sin. That's the only mortal sin. Why do they want that? Because it's such a narcissism show that they want you there for their stupid, banal homily where they never exegete the gospel. They tell you, last weekend I was at the, flea market and blah, blah. That's how they all begin. It's never just, who's the evangelist today? Mark. Okay, Mark's writing to the Roman. Well, it's never that. That's what you get from the Tridentine priest if you go to your Latin Mass. And it's usually short, to the point, beautiful, you learn something. They want you there to hear about their boring stories and jokes, their boomerisms. And
yeah, I don't know of anyone who frequents the traditional Latin Mass, as I don't every Sunday, but I certainly love it. Sorry, back here, and that is, there's not an indispensable minimum attitude. How late can I be, and how soon can I leave for the big game, or to have my smoke in the parking lot after Mass? It's not a question, because you're just unplugged from the regular flow. And I just had an interview with Archbishop Alexander Sample, who had to go on eBay and find DVDs that taught him how to say the Latin Mass. No one would teach him. He didn't learn it in seminary, obviously. So it probably won't land on you the first time. It's a different timing. Obviously, it's a different language, but it really grows on you, and the proof's in the pudding. Families tend to be large in size. They tend to be happy and bold, very publicly pro-life. Listen, there's one of our beloved Nationistas is great name, London Lynn Tyndale Biscoe. Sounds like one of the sons of Jacob Rees-Mogg. Quote, "The wrong ordering of the cosmos is revealed by the Dark Father when the priest says during Mass, 'Sisters and brothers.'" That's kind of a tell, isn't it? If you're getting sisters and brothers, you can probably predict a lot of the premise that's going to follow.
Right? You're going to be pissed sitting there in the pew.
Note that even the 92 Catechism, they did not use gender-neutral language, and I've seen some of the bishops asked about this thing, and they said they did it deliberately, because it used to even be brethren instead of brothers and sisters. This is not a liturgical. Liturgy transcends these stupid trends towards political correctness.
Yep, 100%. I think it was John Paul II who, and I believe it may have been either the Letter to Women or Mulieris Dignitatem, the feminine genius, kind of angling toward overtures toward domesticating or baptizing with a really nice adjective the concept of feminism. Is that where it began inside the Catholic Church, gentlemen?
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, more organically, I think a lot of this stuff came out of the 60s directly in the wake of Vatican II, more to like a parish level. When you're talking about the upper magisterium, then yes, that's
definitely JP2.
After Pius XII, there was a trajectory towards this, with each pope kind of becoming more prone to almost exaggerating the role of women in outward society and downplaying their role in the domestic society, that inward veiled Marian role. So it's almost a linear slide after Pius XII away from the church's real teaching. And, you know, by the time of John Paul II, that was when like kind of an overt feminism began in the magisterium of the church. Now, the thing with the magisterium of John Paul II on women, and I believe there's a 2003 CDF letter about women also, where these things that are part of their magisterium that are not, that they break with the tradition of the church on the role of women in society, and they break with higher magisterial teachings, you know, magisterial teachings of predecessors, which take precedence and were given in a higher magisterial voice, then those new teachings that are kind of being engrafted onto the deposit of faith, they actually carry no weight. Because just like, you know, it's the opposite of in civil law, in church law, in magisterial law, the things that are the most true, that are part and parcel of the deposit of faith, are the oldest things. So when these newer pontificates have broken with the constant tradition of the church and the explicit high-voiced magisterium of their predecessors, they're not entitled to any weight and deference. We look back and there's an like an inverted hierarchy, with the oldest statements controlling and the newer statements kind of being discarded if they contradict older teaching.
Pius XII was really a kind of a ecclesial Rubicon in time. In 1951, I believe, he gave an allocution to it's a group that I don't know if it still exists, but it's called the Association of Large Italian Families, and it's really beautiful. You can find it online. Just look that up, Venerable Pius XII, Allocution, Large Families. And he is just so clear on charming things like women of large families invariably look and are young. They look young because young children with their silvery voices bouncing off the walls keep them young, and just a great reverence for a role that so many women are derided for, deciding not to go for the double income on behalf of, you know, juggling this however number of kids they have, all those Russian plates that have to be managed that most men can barely zero task, right? So I think Pius X was a kind of a hinge.
Go easy on the American WASP woman there, Pat. They've got all of 2.1 kids to manage. I mean, that's a full household, bro.
I just read I don't know if it was your wife or not. Someone said, yeah, women love the workplace because it's easier.
Yeah, it might have been. It's easier in a boring way. It's you know, it's like Niles Crane says, this is boring yet difficult. I think he's trying to learn to waltz. It's like you go to a job. It's similar. We have this puritanical obsession in America. This is one of the things I'm not grateful for. Is America loving American. This puritanical obsession with work that I'm a man. I don't even like going to work, but women got it in their. They didn't get it in their blood. They got the itch that was handed on to them to get into the workplace. It's like it's not even fun. Everyone goes to the job and reads the news. That's the first thing you do.
Yeah, they become hypermen.
Yeah, they were coaxed in by lying, you know, children of the revolution, like Betty Friedan, who told them this whole lie about the problem that has no name and the boredom and ennui of the suburban woman because she's not in the workplace using her talents to the fullest. Like boredom and ennui. Have you ever worked a day in your life?
Yeah.
An 8 to 5 office job and looking at the clock tick down the minutes. That's
Seriously.
boring. And
That's annoying.
this is coming from a guy that I've worked in law firms. I've clerked for a judge. These are supposedly the jobs that Free Dan would say are most sexy, that women would most feel fulfilled in these roles. It's like
Dave's an
love
empowered woman.
Yeah, I'm an
He's
empowered
had all
woman.
these jobs, the sexy ones, with
Right.
the heels and the power suits.
Right. Yeah.
Well-
exactly. The shoulder pads, of course, I think, are the biggest. They do me the most flattery. Yeah.
We're going to have to do this again. This is fun. I cannot believe how quickly time. I actually went over the allotted time because we had some tech problems at the start. I want to thank you, David, and Tim. Say hi to Mr. Christopher Planche. And I'd love to do this again. There's just so much to follow up on. The problems are not going to go away, and the solution is here every day and will be until the end of time. That's our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and the one church that he founded, the Catholic Church. I want to thank the people who belong to Coffin Nation, our beloved Nationistas who chimed in, and invite people. If something that you heard today was interesting and you want to hear more of this, we have members in 18 countries. After we open the doors on Monday, December 1st, it's going to go a lot farther and with more and more members. We meet, we finish each other's sentences, we have weekly prayer intentions, there's commentary and deep dives with experts you will not find anywhere else. So coffinnation.com, maybe I can ask Nipsey. Okay, very good. So coffinnation.com, there I am. Hey, and I'm not so blue. Rules for Retrogrades. The shortest distance between people watching right now and listening to your show and getting your book is what?
Go to my our channel. It's under my name, Timothy Gordon, on YouTube, and of course check out the Amazon book, Catholic Republic. We got another, Sophia Institute Press book, the Catholic Republic. Our one, No Christian Feminism, will be coming out on Sophia. Tan Books will be the good imprint of Rules for Retrogrades in book form. Yeah, and I guess that'll be March.
Yeah, unless it gets bumped up, which they've floated doing, but we're looking at March right now.
Great, fantastic. I know there are a lot of the comments are all double thumbs up. I'm seeing a lot of exclamation mark. Ask Your Husband says, thanks for watching. Pat's recording Rules for Retrograde after this. We'll release tonight. Yeah, let's continue this and get some more secret sauce. People are so happy when you just tell the truth. Stop pope-splaining. Stop defending the indefensible. Be yourself, love your wives, hug your kids, and get a better prayer life. And with that, I want to thank you guys for hanging out. Thanks for your patience as well. We had some tech issues at the top, but we were victorious. So thanks to all. And we'll talk to you real soon on Rules for Retrograde. Fair enough, gentlemen?
Thanks, Patrick. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Often. Fantastic. All right. In the meantime,
Switch your face.
dramatic pause. In the meantime, be a saint. What else is there?